So we are looking at what has to be one of the most compelling meteorological cold cases in the history of the American Northeast today.
For sure. It really is.
I mean, we are talking about the afternoon of Saturday, July 13th, 1895.
Right.
A truly violent, severe weather event just completely descends on the New York metropolitan region.
Yeah, and it specifically devastates this rural sort of suburban hamlet called historic Cherry Hill in New Jersey.
Right.
Which, if you are familiar with the area, that's near modern-day River Edge and Hackensack.
Yes, and then shortly after that initial destruction, this catastrophic strike hits Woodhaven over in Queens.
Right.
So the central mystery we really want to try and resolve today is just a massive culture of scale and storm mechanics. Basically, are we looking at one extraordinary continuous tornado that just carved a trench from Hackensack all the way across New York City?
Or, and this is the alternative, are we dealing with a cyclic supercell?
Yeah.
One that produced two separate, really deadly tornadoes during the same regional severe weather outbreak.
Right, which makes it just a phenomenal meteorological puzzle. Welcome to Meteorology Matters, the podcast, exploring the science, chaos, and stories behind the weather that shapes our world. This show was created by meteorologist Rob Jones.
It's so fascinating because we are trying to apply modern fluid dynamics and contemporary supercell theory to a catastrophic event that occurred decades before the invention of Doppler radar.
Right, or even standardized damage surveys, like reconstructing a historical weather event like this really shifts the whole paradigm of how we analyze storms.
It really does. I mean, today, we are just so accustomed to the National Weather Service having these rapid response damage survey teams on the ground within hours.
Yeah, you expect to see high-resolution drone footage on the news that same night.
Exactly. You get precise measurements of the circulation width, and you get a definitive track map based on that WSR 80AD radar data. But you step back to 1895, and that entire diagnostic apparatus just vanishes.
It's completely gone. You were left with a vastly different set of tools. I mean, the U.S. Weather Bureau did exist in 1895, right?
They did, yeah. But they were relying on scattered barometer readings and, telegraph reports.
Just to hand draw these really broad synoptic weather maps.
Right. They could tell you a low-pressure system was moving through the region, sure, but they absolutely could not track a mesocyclone.
So to reconstruct the actual path of this tornado, we really have to look past the meteorological data and analyze the human footprint.
Yeah, we are tracing property lines and architectural failures.
And local newspaper documentation from the 19th century just to try and map the wind field. But, tracing a 19th century tornado path like that, it kind of feels a lot like trying to trace a constellation in the night sky.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Because you have these scattered points of light, right? The ruined barns, the leveled cottages, the uprooted orchards. And it is incredibly tempting to just draw a solid, dramatic line connecting all of them.
It is tempting. But making that leap, assuming a continuous track between those specific points of damage, it might not actually hold up to scientific scrutiny.
Why not, though? I mean, if you see damage here and damage there, why is it so bad to just connect the dots?
Well, drawing that continuous line requires ignoring how thunderstorms actually behave in reality. A supercell isn't a plow that just drops a blade and drives in a straight line for 50 miles.
Right. It's not a physical object dragging on the ground.
Exactly. It is a highly dynamic, breathing fluid system. And to really understand what this specific system did, we have to start where the violence first manifested on the ground.
Which takes us to the Hackensack Valley.
Right.
So let's set the physical and atmospheric stage for Bergen County in 1895. And we should probably clarify right up front for our New Jersey listeners, we are talking about historic Cherry Hill here.
Yeah, this is not the modern municipality of Cherry Hill down in Camden County along the Turnpike.
Right, entirely different place. This historic Cherry Hill was a distinct, really vibrant settlement that was tied closely to the New Jersey and New York Railroad.
And the geography here is really critical for understanding the storm's inflow. So you have the Palisades along the Hudson River to the east. Okay. And the specific area we are looking at was a picturesque transition zone. You had sprawling agricultural estates, orchards, and these ancient glacial boulders just kind of giving way to a developing suburban village corridor.
So it was a landscape in transition.
Very much so, which means we have a really interesting mix of large, isolated farm structures and tightly packed residential cottages to act as our wind indicators.
That makes sense. And the atmospheric setup for that Saturday, it honestly reads like a classic severe weather textbook.
Oh, it really does.
Around 10 in the morning, you get this initial round of heavy rain moving through the area. Then, just after 2 in the afternoon, a second round of showers pushes through.
Right.
Now, in the context of a July day in the mid-Atlantic, those early rounds of precipitation are doing a lot of heavy lifting to prime the environment, aren't they?
Oh, massive amounts of heavy lifting. Those morning and early afternoon showers are completely modifying the boundary layer. Well, they are pumping immense amounts of low-level moisture into the local atmosphere. So when the sun finally comes out between those waves of precipitation, it immediately begins heating that saturated ground.
Which just turns the whole area into a sauna.
Pretty much. You get rapid evaporation, which drives the dew points way up, and you get intense surface heating, which creates really steep lapse rates.
Meaning the temperature drops off really quickly as you go up in the atmosphere.
Yes.
Oh.
So the warm, moist air at the surface becomes incredibly buoyant compared to the much cooler air aloft.
It just wants to rise as fast as possible.
Exactly. The atmosphere basically becomes explosively unstable.
And you can actually see that instability in the historical records. The accounts describe the sky changing in a way that deeply unnerved the locals.
I can imagine.
The documents specifically note the sky turning this menacing, unnatural yellow-red color as these pitch-black clouds approached from the west and south.
Yeah, that color shift is so iconic for severe weather.
And then the hail begins. And we aren't talking about little pea-sized hail here. Yeah. We are talking about large stones, shattering windows, completely decimating the corn and oat crops, and actually injuring livestock out in the fields.
Which is terrifying.
It is. But what is the thermodynamic reality behind that yellow-red sky? Because when you read it in a 19th century newspaper, it sounds like something out of a Gothic novel.
It does sound super dramatic, but that bruised yellow-red or sometimes sickly green sky, it's actually a highly specific optical phenomenon.
Really?
Yeah, it's driven by the storm's internal structure. When a supercell develops an incredibly dense core of precipitation, so we are talking massive amounts of suspended liquid water and large hail, it essentially acts as a giant filter for sunlight.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Right. As the late afternoon sun hits the back of that towering cumulonimbus cloud, the dense water droplets and the hailstones cause what we call mice scattering.
Haze scattering.
Yeah. Basically, the shorter wavelengths of light, like your blues and purples, are scattered out, which allows the longer wavelengths, the yellows and reds, to penetrate all the way through that massive precipitation core.
Wow. So when you see that color, you are quite literally looking at a visual indicator of a massive suspended volume of water and ice.
That is exactly what you're seeing. The sky is telling you how much mass is up there.
Which transitions perfectly into the hail reports. Because to generate hail large enough to shatter 19th century glass and physically injure livestock, we aren't just talking about a passing summer thunderstorm.
Not at all.
The localized vertical energy required to support that kind of mass is just staggering.
It is. To support crop-destroying hail like that, the storm's updraft has to be incredibly intense. Hail forms right at the interface of the updraft and the downdraft, where supercooled water droplets are carried high above the freezing level.
Right, so the stronger the wind blowing upward, the bigger the hail can get before it falls.
Exactly. The stronger the updraft, the longer the hailstone is suspended up there. And the longer it's suspended, the larger it can grow by accumulating layers and layers of ice before gravity finally wins the battle.
So to get hailstones heavy enough to do the kind of structural and agricultural damage they documented in Hackensack, how fast is that air moving?
You are looking at localized updraft velocities easily exceeding 70 to 100 miles per hour straight up.
100 miles per hour straight up into the sky. That is wild.
It really is.
And that kind of extreme vertical velocity, combined with the changing wind direction with height, the wind shear, that is basically the engine of the mesocyclone.
Yeah, the rotation is stretching vertically, it's tightening up, and it's preparing to reach the ground.
You really have to put yourself in the position of a Bergen County resident in 1895 for a second.
Oh, it must have been terrifying.
Because today, you and I have overlapping layers of warning systems. Our phones get push alerts. The sirens go off in town. You turn on the television and see the meteorologist pointing at the velocity couplet on the radar.
You usually have minutes, sometimes even an hour of lead time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But back then, your warning was purely sensory. It was just the sudden temperature drop, the optical shift in the sky we just talked about, the physical impact of the hail, and then the sound.
Right, that escalating mechanical roar.
The sensory deprivation, or rather the sheer suddenness of the sensory overload, is just terrifying to consider. Your reaction time is measured in seconds.
Literally seconds. There is no broadcast meteorologist telling you the storm's exact track or what street it's going to cross. You either have a cellar or you are entirely at the mercy of the architecture around you.
And a lot of that architecture was about to fail.
Yeah.
So the vortex physically touches down at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon.
Right.
And because of the historical records, we can actually track this highly localized wind field property by property, which is amazing for 1895.
It really is a goldmine of data.
So the black funnel and the roar are first documented at the Randall Farm on Kinderkamack Road, which sits up in an elevated agricultural area.
Oh.
The storm then accelerates south, and it hits the Wesley Stoney property. Now, the main house takes severe damage, but the historical documents really fixate on the windmill.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, the tornadic winds just completely carry away the windmill. And reading that initially, you might think, oh, they lost a quaint historical feature of their farm.
Right, like a decorative piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But analyzing the agricultural reality of the 19th century, that windmill is essentially their power grid.
It is the absolute lifeblood of that property's infrastructure. In an era before rural electrification, a windmill is a highly specialized piece of engineering. It's designed to harness ambient wind to pump hundreds of gallons of water from deep underground wells.
So without it, everything stops.
Everything. It supplies the irrigation for the crops, the drinking water for the livestock, and the domestic water for the family inside the house.
So when the tornado completely removes that structure, it doesn't just cause property damage?
No, it instantly causes a catastrophic failure of the farm's entire operating system.
Right.
The economic viability of that farm is basically neutralized in a matter of seconds.
It's such a stark reminder that the true impact of historical weather is often hidden in these really specific structural details.
Yeah, losing a windmill was devastating.
So from the Stoney property, the vortex churns into the Cornelius Zabriskie estate. Now, this was a sprawling, very heavily built property.
Okay, so a lot of heavy timber.
Yes, massive structures. The tornado impacts this huge, heavy timber barn and completely collapses it, severely injuring 2 workers who were inside. Huge, ancient trees on the estate are just snapped in half.
Right.
But right in the middle of this absolute obliteration, the records note something incredible.
Yeah.
A duck sitting on its nest survives completely unharmed.
I love this detail.
It's wild, right? Heavy timber's reduced to splinters all around it, but this fragile bird isn't even displaced from its nest.
It sounds like a pure local folklore.
It really does. But it actually perfectly illustrates the bizarre fluid dynamics of a tornado, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I mean, it sounds absurd, but it aligns perfectly with the mechanics of tornadic wind fields.
How so?
Well, a tornado is not a solid, uniform wall of force moving at a constant speed like a bulldozer.
Right.
It is a highly chaotic, turbulent system. In wider, stronger tornadoes, you often have what we call a multiple vortex structure.
Where there are smaller tornadoes inside the big one.
Essentially, yes, you have the broader parent circulation, and rotating within that, you have these smaller, violently rotating suction vortices.
Okay.
And these subvortices contain the most extreme pressure gradients and the most extreme wind speeds of the entire storm.
So the heavy timber barn might take a direct hit from one of these tiny suction vortices, experiencing this instantaneous pressure drop, and winds well over 150 miles per hour.
Exactly. While a spot just 30 feet away might only experience the weaker background circulation.
Which explains how a duck survives while a barn gets leveled.
Part of it, yeah. But furthermore, we have to consider boundary layer friction.
Right, friction from the Earth's surface.
Yeah, the wind speed is basically 0, right at the very surface of the Earth due to friction, and it increases exponentially as you move up, even just a few feet.
Oh, I see.
So a duck sitting low on a nest presents a remarkably small aerodynamic profile within that high-friction boundary layer.
The wind is literally just going over its head.
Yes. The heavy barn, however, is a massive sail. The wind creates immense stagnation pressure on the windward wall, while the aerodynamic lift engages the entire roof structure.
It just tears it apart.
The building envelope fails, the walls blow out, and the whole structure collapses. So the chaotic interplay of those suction vortices and the boundary layer aerodynamics, that really dictates who survives and what is destroyed.
That is just fascinating. So as the tornado leaves these elevated estates, it accelerates down Kinderkamack Road, and it crosses from the open agricultural land into the densely populated residential and commercial heart of Cherry Hill.
This is where things get really bad.
Yeah, this transition marks what local historians actually refer to as the 8 minutes of devastation.
8 minutes. Wow.
It strikes the Cherry Hill Hotel first. The proprietor, Conrad Friedman, recognizes the danger. He sees the storm coming, and he rushes to close the windows to protect the interior from the wind and the hail.
Oh, wow.
But as he is standing right at the windows, the structural integrity of the hotel fails, the building collapses inward, and he is crushed.
That is just awful.
It is a horrific tragedy, and it's driven by a very common misconception about severe weather, even today.
It really is. The idea that opening or closing windows will save a building by equalizing the pressure is one of the most enduring and fatal myths in all of meteorology.
People always say you should crack a window so the house doesn't explode.
Right. People historically believed that the massive pressure drop inside the tornado would cause a sealed house to literally explode from the inside out.
But that's not what happens.
No, the reality is that the dynamic pressure, the sheer physical force of the wind impacting the structure, is far more destructive than any static pressure drop.
So if you are near a window, if you are standing near a window, attempting to manipulate it as a tornado hits, you are placing yourself in the absolute most vulnerable part of the building envelope, right at the moment it fails.
Which is exactly what happened to Friedman.
Unfortunately, yes.
And directly across the street from the collapsing hotel is the Cherry Hill Reformed Church. The sexton, Frederick Himmel, is inside the sanctuary at the time.
Okay.
The localized accounts describe what can only be called a sensory nightmare. The sky goes completely black. The roar is deafening. Then, debris from the hotel across the street is picked up by the wind field, basically weaponized, and driven straight through the stained glass and timber walls of the church.
Oh, my goodness.
So Himmel is trapped inside this darkened, failing structure with glass and wood flying everywhere. The wind hits the church with such immense lateral force that it actually shifts the entire stone and timber building 2 to 3 feet off its foundation.
The lateral force required to shift a 19th century church building off a stone foundation is just staggering.
I can't even fathom it. You are overcoming the sheer mass of the structure, plus the friction of the foundation connection.
But incredibly, it doesn't suffer total catastrophic collapse.
Really? How did it stay up?
The records indicate that a large tree stump adjacent to the foundation actually caught the structure as it slid.
You are kidding. A stump?
A stump. It prevented it from sliding completely off and collapsing on Himmel.
The margins of survival in these events are just incredibly thin. A stump catches the foundation, and a man lives.
But the storm's capriciousness is devastatingly apparent as it hits a row of residential cottages just past the church.
Okay, what happens there?
The H.C. Hodges cottage is reduced to splinters. Total destruction. Hodges is down in the basement with the baby, while his wife is trapped upstairs with 2 other children as the house is literally shredded around them.
That sounds completely unsurvivable.
Miraculously, all 5 survive, though the wife suffers severe bruising escaping the collapsing upper floors.
The survival of the Hodges family really highlights the absolute necessity of below-ground shelter. The basement removes you from that dynamic wind loading we discussed earlier.
Right. But what about the wife and kids upstairs?
Their survival in a splintered home is purely a matter of probability and luck. They just happen to fall or be thrown into voids within the collapsing debris rather than being struck by the heavy structural members.
And we know it's luck because right next door to the Hodges you have the Ahrens family dwelling. The tornado hits it. The structure is shattered in the exact same way, but there is no miraculous void in the debris.
Oh, that's terrible.
An 8-month-old infant, Frank H. Ahrens, is killed in the wreckage.
It's just so arbitrary.
The storm arbitrarily shatters one family and completely spares another just yards away. Now, when modern meteorological databases look back at this level of localized destruction, houses completely swept away or splintered, heavy structures shifted off foundations, they tend to assign this 1895 storm an F3 rating on the Fujita scale.
Right. Which makes sense on the surface.
But applying a modern diagnostic metric to 19th century architecture requires a lot of context, doesn't it?
It requires an abundance of caution, honestly. Dr. Ted Fujita introduced the F scale in 1971, which, was later updated to the enhanced Fujita scale we use now.
Right.
When climatologists and researchers go back to build historical tornado climatology, they use descriptions from contemporary documents to estimate the wind speeds based on the observed damage indicators.
Okay, so they read these old newspaper clippings.
Yeah, and an F3 rating implies winds of roughly 158 to 206 miles per hour, which is capable of tearing the roof and walls off well-constructed houses.
But that is the crucial variable, right? well constructed.
Exactly. We are relying on historical estimates without the benefit of knowing how these specific buildings were engineered.
Right, we don't know the exact anchoring system of the Hodges cottage, or the framing techniques they used in the Aaron's dwelling.
We have no idea. If a house is merely resting on stone piers without modern anchor bolts tying the sill plate to the foundation, it can be completely swept away by significantly weaker winds.
Like maybe just F1 or F2 strength.
Precisely. A modern damage survey team looks closely at the failure points. They ask, did the nails pull out? Did the anchor bolts snap? Was the wood rotten?
But in 1895, we just have a document stating the house was blown to splinters.
Exactly. So while the sheer density and severity of the damage across multiple large structures confidently indicate a strong, likely violent tornado, assigning it a definitive F3 rating is really a retrospective best guess. It's not a measured scientific fact.
We just have to acknowledge the limits of historical reconstruction.
We do.
Though the physical climax of the New Jersey destruction really underscores that violent power, regardless of the exact rating. As the vortex sweeps through the village core, it hits the New Jersey and New York Railroad depot.
A depot building would be substantial.
Very. And the contemporary documents specifically note that the depot was lifted entirely off its base and removed. It didn't just blow over or collapse in on itself, it was literally lifted.
That is wild. The updraft velocities at the surface must have been incredible.
Right.
A railroad depot is designed to handle heavy loads, freight, and massive public crowding. To lift it requires the converging inflow winds to create an intense vacuum effect, basically funneling the kinetic energy vertically.
The aerodynamic lift just overpowered the sheer mass of the building entirely.
It's hard to even picture.
With the village core completely devastated, the wind field pushes eastward. It crosses Coles Brook and impacts the Mildner farm.
Okay.
A newly painted yellow dwelling is overturned, and a blacksmith shop is totally obliterated. This is a critical data point for the path because it proves the intense, damaging winds continued well beyond the immediate village center and pushed across the water.
Right, it establishes continuity.
But as the storm crosses the Hackensack River and moves into Teaneck, the damage signature in the historical records really begins to change.
How so?
Well, the scope of the destruction broadens significantly. It strikes the sprawling estates in Teaneck, places like Red Towers, the Henderson residence, and the massive Phelps estate.
Okay.
But the accounts don't describe splintered homes as much as they describe hundreds of trees being snapped or uprooted, chimneys being blown off, and vast expanses of greenhouse glass being shattered.
I see.
The highly localized splintering destruction we saw in the village transitions into this much wider, almost diffused swath of damage.
Which raises a major meteorological question for anyone looking at this storm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If greenhouses are shattering across a massive area miles away from the tightly concentrated damage path in Chat Hill, are those estates actually being hit by the tornadic circulation itself?
Or, and this is very likely, are we looking at the impact of the rear flank downdraft?
Yes, let's talk about that. The distinction between the tornado and the rear flank downdraft, or RFD, is super critical here.
It really is. So the RFD is a massive surge of sinking, rain-cooled air on the backside of the supercell. As it descends, it wraps around the mesocyclone, and it is actually instrumental in concentrating the rotation and helping the tornado reach the ground in the first place.
Right.
But the RFD is a distinct wind feature from the tornado. When that sinking air hits the surface, it spreads out rapidly, creating straight-line winds that can easily exceed 80 to 100 miles per hour over a path that can be miles wide.
So if you are standing on the Phelps estate in Teaneck in 1895, the sky is black, the wind is roaring, trees are snapping all around you, and the greenhouse glass is just exploding everywhere.
In your mind, you were experiencing the cyclone.
Of course. But from a fluid dynamics perspective, the actual concentrated tornadic vortex might be lifting or roping out nearby, while the broader RFD momentum is what is actually doing the damage to your property.
Exactly. Without an aerial survey to differentiate between the highly localized, convergent, swirling damage pattern of a tornado and the divergent, fan-like damage pattern of straight-line winds, contemporary observers simply recorded all of it as the tornado.
They didn't know any better.
Right. The entire system is violently energetic, but mapping the exact boundary of the funnel versus the RFD in an 1895 document is basically impossible.
So the immediate aftermath in New Jersey presents a really grim human toll. 3 people are confirmed dead. Conrad Friedman at the hotel, the infant Frank Ahrens, and a laborer named Anton Fisher, who was killed when a stable roof collapsed on the August Munn farm.
And roughly 20 others suffered severe injuries, right?
Yes, roughly a score injured. And the community response is exactly what you would expect from a resilient 19th century settlement. Doctors and firemen are rapidly dispatched from Hackensack.
That's good.
The railroad deploys a wrecking train equipped with heavy lifting gear to clear the tracks and aid in the rescue efforts.
Wow, an actual wrecking train. That's a massive response.
Yeah, they were very organized. But what happens on Sunday morning introduces a fascinating and honestly pretty unsettling sociological element to this weather event.
Oh, the disaster tourism.
The disaster tourism.
Yeah.
Human curiosity in the face of localized devastation is just a powerful, overwhelming force.
It really is. Long before the era of social media check-ins or, live streaming from disaster zones on your phone, the innate desire to witness a catastrophe firsthand drove massive crowds to Cherry Hill.
The estimates suggest that 25,000 sightseers flooded into the area the very next day.
25,000. That is an unbelievable number for 1895.
They arrived on bicycles, in horse-drawn wagons, and on foot. The roads were completely clogged with people pouring in from Brooklyn, Newark, Paterson, and New York.
Just a sea of people.
So you have this incredibly tense juxtaposition. On one hand, you have neighbors and doctors pulling bodies and survivors out of the splintered lumber.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have tens of thousands of people turning a devastated community into a spectacle. And the historical accounts indicate it wasn't just passive gawking either.
No, the crowds brought exploitation. Looters basically embedded themselves in the streams of sightseers.
Disgusting.
The documents record people stealing agricultural tools from the ruined farms, taking books and personal items from the shattered homes, and even making off with the surviving poultry.
Stealing a disaster victim's chickens.
Yeah. The local infrastructure and law enforcement were just completely unequipped to handle a sudden influx of 25,000 people.
You really have to picture it. You are standing in the absolute wreckage of your life. You've lost your home, maybe you have lost a neighbor or a family member, and 20,000 strangers are treating your ruined property like a bizarre carnival, literally prying souvenirs out of your foundation.
It is an incredibly dark aspect of the human response to weather disasters.
But here's the craziest part. The sheer scale of the crowds in New Jersey was just a preview.
Right, because the storm wasn't done.
Exactly. Because roughly 49 minutes after the tornado first touched down in Hackensack, the same atmospheric system produced a second catastrophe 25 miles to the east.
So we shift our geographic focus across the Hudson River to an increasingly urbanizing borough of New York City.
It is 4:19 p.m. A violent tornadic circulation strikes Woodhaven and the Union Course area of Queens, centering near Jamaica Avenue and Eldred's Lane.
And that shift in geography means a massive shift in the vulnerability of the population.
Absolutely. In Bergen County, the storm was interacting with sprawling farms and a relatively small village core. Queens presents a densely built urban environment.
The housing stock is packed tightly together.
Very tightly. The damage reports from Woodhaven describe an intense, highly concentrated strike. Roughly 15 houses are completely demolished and 30 more are partially wrecked.
Wow.
And the human tragedy here centers heavily around the local schoolhouse. 2 fatalities are documented in this phase of the storm. A woman named Louise Petrocchian and a child, Johnny Cold.
That is heartbreaking.
Dozens more injured in the collapsing residential structures all around that area.
Because the density of the urban grid means that any structural failure has a cascading effect. Debris from one home becomes a high-velocity projectile that compromises the neighboring home.
Exactly. It's a domino effect of destruction.
But that urban connectivity also drastically alters the post-storm environment we were just talking about.
The disaster tourism.
Right. If 25,000 people could reach rural New Jersey by wagon and bicycle, think about Woodhaven. Woodhaven was connected directly to the mass transit system of late 19th century New York City.
The scale of the disaster tourism in Queens is almost difficult to comprehend. The following day, an estimated 100,000 visitors utilized the rail and transit lines to swarm the Woodhaven ruins.
100,000 people.
Descending on just a few devastated city blocks. They completely surrounded the shattered schoolhouse, literally suffocating the site of a fatal tragedy and a crush of humanity.
The local authorities must have been entirely overwhelmed.
Completely. You cannot establish a secure perimeter when an extra 100,000 people arrive via train to walk through a disaster zone.
But the community response to this overwhelming influx of crowds is actually quite brilliant from a sociological perspective.
Oh, I love how the locals handled this. They realized they couldn't physically stop the crowds from gawking at their destroyed roofs and shattered walls, so they monetized the spectacle.
It's so smart.
They set a donation kegs around the ruins. They essentially charged the sightseers admission. If you want to come stare the destruction of my neighborhood, put a quarter in the keg.
It is peak 19th century New York hustle.
It really is. They effectively invented a localized, analog crowdfunding campaign to establish a disaster relief fund on the fly.
It is a remarkable display of improvised community resilience, using the overwhelming numbers of the disaster tourists to finance the immediate recovery efforts of the victims.
But the presence of this second, highly destructive tornado in Queens brings us right back to the central meteorological investigation of the event.
Right.
We have Cherry Hill, New Jersey, hit at approximately 3:30 p.m. We have Woodhaven, Queens, hit at 4:15 p.m. The events are separated by 49 minutes and roughly 25 miles.
Yes.
Are we looking at one massive, continuous tornado that ground its way across the Hackensack Valley, across the Hudson River, over Manhattan, and into Queens? Or did this system produce two distinct tornadoes?
Well, the historical evidence for a single continuous tornado is deeply rooted in the contemporary narrative of the time.
Okay, what were they looking at to make that assumption?
First, the spatial and temporal timelines align perfectly with the movement of a severe squall line or a fast-moving supercell. A storm cell could very easily traverse that 25-mile gap in 49 minutes.
That part checks out.
Right. Second, the 1895 Monthly Weather Review, which was the premier meteorological publication of the era, put out by the government, grouped the New Jersey and Queens destruction together in a single summary.
Oh, so it was officially linked in print.
Yes. And over the subsequent decades, popular histories and local folklore cemented this idea of a singular, monstrous vortex tearing a continuous scar right through the heart of the most famous city on Earth.
It is an incredibly dramatic narrative. The idea of a violent wedge tornado crossing the Hudson, marching block by block across Manhattan, crossing the East River, and tearing into Brooklyn and Queens.
It feels like a disaster movie script.
It totally does. But when you start pulling at the threads of that narrative, when you look at the localized property-by-property evidence like we've been doing, the idea of a continuous track begins to fall apart.
It really does. The evidence against a single track is compelling, primarily through the absence of data.
Meaning we don't have records of damage in between.
Exactly. There is no verified, continuous chain of structural damage connecting Teaneck, New Jersey to Woodhaven, Queens.
Right.
If a violent F3 strength tornado marched across Manhattan in the late afternoon of a summer Saturday, the historical record would be absolutely saturated with accounts of catastrophic urban destruction in the city center.
Because Manhattan was incredibly dense in 1895.
Very dense. We simply do not see that continuous footprint of destruction.
Furthermore, when you analyze the localized wind direction reports, there is a distinct atmospheric disconnect between the two events.
That's a great point.
The accounts from Woodhaven heavily emphasized the storm approaching from the west and southwest, pushing the debris field in that direction. But the highly detailed accounts from New Jersey note northwesterly winds and converging inflow patterns that don't perfectly align with the orientation required for a continuous track into Queens.
The wind vectors just don't match up.
And then there's the 49-minute temporal gap.
Right. While a storm system can certainly cover that distance in that time, 49 minutes is an exceptionally long lifespan for a single tornadic vortex to remain continuously on the ground without experiencing occlusion.
Without choking itself out.
Exactly. From a meteorological perspective, that gap strongly suggests a specific behavior inherent to severe thunderstorms, the cyclic supercell.
This is where the physics of the storm really take over the narrative. And for a weather-savvy audience, the concept of a cyclic supercell explains so many historical weather mysteries.
It's the key to understanding long-track events.
Walk us through the mechanics of how a supercell breathes and cycles over a 49-minute window.
Okay, so a supercell is driven by its rotating updraft, the mesocyclone. This is what drops the initial tornado, in this case, over the Hackensack Valley.
Right.
But as the storm matures, that rear flank downdraft we discussed earlier begins to wrap completely around the tornadic circulation.
The RFD curtain.
Yes. This curtain of rain-cooled, sinking air eventually cuts off the inflow of warm, moist, buoyant air that the tornado needs to survive. The tornado is essentially starved of its fuel.
So it thins out, ropes out, and dissipates.
Yes, this is the occlusion process.
So the storm effectively suffocates its own tornado. But the larger parent supercell hasn't dissipated.
Not at all.
It is still churning through the atmosphere, moving east toward New York City.
Exactly. The storm regroups. The original mesocyclone weakens, but a new mesocyclone establishes itself along the advancing gust front, typically a few miles down the line from the original circulation.
Okay, so it just spins up a new one.
Yes. This new updraft begins to rotate, it strengthens, and eventually it drops a completely new tornado. This process of occlusion and regeneration is called cycling.
But historically, meteorologists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries didn't have the high-resolution radar data or the contiguous county damage surveys to recognize this cycling process.
No, they were basically flying blind compared to us.
So when they looked at a map and saw catastrophic damage in Hackensack, and then catastrophic damage in Queens an hour later, they just connected the dots.
They assumed it was one massive tornado that just occasionally lifted off the ground.
You see this constantly in historical records, the concept of the skipping tornado. The cyclone hit the valley, skipped over the mountain, and touched down in the next town.
Which isn't how it works.
Right. Fluid dynamics don't work like a bouncing ball. It didn't skip. The first vortex died, the storm cycled, and it birthed a second vortex.
And the semantic confusion of the 1895 records really exacerbates this misinterpretation.
Oh, because of how they used words back then.
Yeah, when you read the historical documents, the terminology is incredibly loose. Observers and reporters use the words cyclone, tornado, hurricane, and storm completely interchangeably.
Which is a nightmare for a modern researcher.
It is. If a newspaper reports that the cyclone that struck Hackensack has hit Queens, they are very likely referring to the overarching parent thunderstorm, the supercell itself, rather than the specific funnel cloud that destroyed the Cherry Hill Hotel.
It really highlights the inherent danger of forcing a dramatic narrative over the scientific evidence.
We crave that neat, clean line on the map.
We do. We want the definitive track. But the physical evidence strongly supports the occurrence of destructive tornadoes in both locations, generated by the same overarching cyclic supercell system.
Until a contiguous block-by-block damage chain is somehow documented across the urban core of Manhattan, we have to treat these responsibly as separate tornadoes.
Or at the very least, separate tornadic episodes within one massive, violent atmospheric event.
Because mapping historical weather requires accepting the limits of our data. The map can only tell you where the wind blew, but the human geography of the disaster, knowing exactly who lived where, what each building functioned as, and how the people inside reacted, that recovers the storm in a way a simple track map never could.
Historical certainty definitely has limits, and a responsible meteorological reconstruction marks that uncertainty rather than filling in the gaps with a dramatic, unsupported line across the Hudson River.
Right.
Before we draw the tornado's path, we have to recover the places it touched. At Cherry Hill, the map begins not with a track line, but with a farm, a hotel, a church, a cottage, a depot, and the people who were there when the sky turned black.
It is a sobering reminder that rare, violent weather in the Northeast isn't a modern invention driven solely by contemporary climate shifts. It is baked deeply into the history of the land.
And it really makes you wonder, if a cyclic supercell of that exact magnitude took that exact path today, dropping a violent vortex in modern-day Hackensack, cycling over Manhattan, and dropping a second violent vortex into densely packed Queens, how much would our modern warning systems really change the outcome?
With millions of people in the path, it's hard to say.
Would the sirens and the push alerts from NOAA be enough to mitigate the structural reality of a storm like that? It is something to seriously think about the next time the summer sky turns bruised and yellow. If this exploration of weather history changed how you see the skies over New York and New Jersey, be sure to follow Rob Jones on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook for more incredible meteorological history and analysis. Please like, follow, comment, and rate the podcast on whatever app you're using right now. It truly helps us bring these stories to light.
The sky is always writing history if we just know how to read it.
You've been listening to Meteorology Matters, created by meteorologist Rob Jones. Thanks for listening, and remember, meteorology always matters.